Hello, this is the first lesson in Unit 1. I remind you that all this unit is about advocacy and change. And this unit, 1.1, is called Theory of Change. However, in spite of the name, we will try to make it as less theoretical as possible because we believe that, given the short lesson, it is best if it is useful and practical at the same time. There are two takeaways from this lesson. And one is knowledge of the different ways in which change flows, in how change happens. And then what is the second step would be what makes change stay, because in advocacy, of course, we want the change that we bring about to stay, and some misnomers about change. Then we would like you to take away from this lesson an awareness of the parabola of change and the timing of the parabola of change, and about what advocacy is not. And advocacy, we would like to see it as not being about changing people's minds. But as we've said in the general lesson, advocacy is about putting a problem on the agenda, not really changing people's minds. Let's look at the theory of change as a concept. The key questions are: how does change happen? And what can we do to make it happen in the way we would like it to? This is why it is about advocacy. And the first exercise would be imagination, scenario building. Ideally, scenario building with others. With others means, I'm sure you have heard of the 6 thinking hats by Edward de Bono. There are several activities that can help you think and put down notes about thinking and brainstorming with others. And even scenario building can be done with others, applying whatever method. When we speak of imagination and scenario building, we need to forget baggage for a moment so that imagination is more free to roam. And when we say free from baggage, we mean that sometimes when we imagine things, we start from what could not be. Whereas in a scenario building, in the best scenario building, that's why it is called best, we start with imagining not the why not the why. So let us look at the best scenario activity. It is the place to start with a scenario that is free from baggage. Let us call it the mission or objective of a change that one may wish to bring about. So how is the scenario built? I will go back to the slide. Write down a story or describe a picture of things to aim for. All things being equal, in an utopic kind of circumstance, and assuming that there are no challenges on the way. This is not easy. Wherever we start thinking of something, we think, of course, with our experience, and that is our baggage, which is good to apply. However, when we start with baggage, we cannot imagine a scenario without that baggage, and therefore, we cannot stretch our efforts. When we create this scenario, let us say you are thinking of, let's stay in the context, about integration. You imagine in your town, a town where 30% are foreigners, half of those are immigrants, and the other half are economic migrants from Europe that work in a specific sector. Your story needs to be quite taking stock into what you know, but it needs to be imaginative and quite specific. That is why it makes it a vivid picture that people you are working with can imagine. It is not an easy process. Include in the story, or in the picture you are describing, the impact and benefit of what your scenario that you would like to obtain, the impact it would have on these areas in your community, on society, on technology, economy, environment, politics, and values. These are called the steep V. Now, these steep V guys will keep on coming up frequently, both in this unit and even in the third unit later on. So it's good that we keep them in mind because they are such good elements at showing what impact we want to bring about. They are called the drivers of change. Now, they are called the drivers of change by experts in foresight tools and techniques. Foresight with a big F. When we speak of foresight, we think you can predict the future, whereas foresight with a big F, it is about creating the future, creating the scenario. They are what we call the drivers of change, but they are also, and this I like to use them in this way, They offer an excellent opportunity to engage your advocacy team in a team building and a mission building exercise. What do you do? That, for example, if you are building a best scenario together before you are starting your advocacy, you have not started yet, you give everyone a task to look at this scenario from different perspectives. Maybe each one takes the hat, one of technology, one of society, one of the environment, and like that you build a picture that is comprehensive, clear, and you can discuss how one affects the other. So Steep V, although it is used for foresight, I like to use it to analyze many situations, even outside the foresight kind of environment. Let us go to some examples. This is example 1. This is a very old project, relatively old project. It was called E4C, and it was a foresight exercise. It was funded by the EU in 2002, before Malta joined the European Union. And this was a foresight exercise where it was for Malta, Latvia, and Cyprus. There were 3 small nations joining the EU. And there were teams, and each team worked on education. There were teams that worked on food, about how joining the EU will affect Malta. And they took these into consideration: society, technology, environment, politics, values, the Steep V guys again. Of course, when you do an exercise in this way at a national level, it is very, very complex. And sometimes these foresight activities and best scenarios are built for a whole country, so you can imagine how more complex it becomes. But something more specific is the coronavirus pandemic. This would be a very good second example. What effect did it have on our community? And I take you back to the Steep V gang. You can look at the effect of the coronavirus pandemic on your community and how it affected society, technology, economy, environment, politics, and values. So you can take the effect of a pandemic on your community from these aspects. Or how these could have been or have been solutions. For example, older people and vulnerable people were more stuck at home, so technology came to save the day, with online shopping, with more use of social media, with more skills needed for online booking, online ordering, online communication. How the values changed, how the community became more inspired by solidarity, how everyone helped. And Steep V they are good at seeing things from different perspectives. Again, like the Thinking Heads by Edward de Bono, everyone can assume a role. Everyone, maybe one of the team of your advocacy is more conversant with economy, so he takes the economic aspect, and you share ideas using the Steep V method. Ages ago, and I say ages ago, I was involved in an interesting exercise. It was called My Village in the Year 2020. And this is about the parabola of change, this example, and how we learn about the parabola and timing of change as we go. I remember we had run a pilot activity with children at school. It was about creating a picture showing their imaginary town in the year 2020. This was in 2004. So 2020 was something so far away. And we took the children and we asked them to imagine their village. And they imagined flying cars. They imagined what we would have imagined when I was my age. They used to ask us to write a letter to your friend in the year 2000. And I used to imagine my father to come home from work and he lands his car on our roof. We still don't have flying cars. When we took that same example and we did it with early teenagers had already more experience about the parabola of change. So when they were asked to imagine their village in the year 2020, they did not imagine flying cars. But even 20 years ago, they imagined cars that do not pollute, because they had already started becoming conscious of the Steep V. They had already started analyzing the parabola of change. If you had to do this exercise with your community now, you will realize that the older we grow, the less we can imagine. And that is why imagination is very good when you create a scenario, all things being equal. In a nutshell, we tried in this short lesson, and we will continue in the forum after this lesson, we have looked at different ways in which change flows and what makes change stay. But we have not spoken about misnomers or cliches about change. And I like this because I like vocabulary. So we propose you visit this page. We will put the link in the comments under this video about words related to change, how people throw them about like they were free cards, free vouchers, like game changer, disruptive. And sometimes you need to reflect and say change does not need to be always disruptive. You don't need to change the game. Sometimes you need to improve the game. So although your imagination for a foresight, for a best scenario needs to be imaginative, it does not have to be massive change. But that comes from when, later on in this unit, we will look at making plans that are realistic, that are in touch with the challenges you might have. If you play this game, you can ask yourself how many of these words related to change are used capriciously, especially in curriculum vitae. I am a game changer. But really no one or very few people are. We would like to end this lesson with a small task. The context of this unit is about migration and integration. And usually if I ask you to look at the effect of migration, how you imagine it is now and in the future on your community, we usually immediately think of society and economy. But we would like you to take a different approach. Look at how migration is affecting your community and how it's affecting the locals, not only the migrants and the dynamics. But we would like you to take into consideration the changes from the technology, environment, and values point of view. Leave social change and the economy out of the picture. It is a bit of a challenge to create more discipline in your thinking. And if you could share your reflections in the comments under this lesson, we will continue in a forum. Thank you.